Hi everybody, it's Geordie from Geordie's Cards. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am creating this fun little My Favourite Things birthday card. Now, I didn't really have a plan when I started this card today. I just wanted to use my Zig Clean Colour Real Brush markers. So I went through my stamp stash and I picked this one out, which is the Better Together stamp set. I do have the coordinating dies because I actually bought this as a card kit a while ago from MFT. So I'm stamping out the images that I want to use using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'm using this ink because these are water brush markers, so they're watercolors, but also because I wanted to use some clear embossing powder over the top, and this VersaFine ink stays wet for a little while so that the embossing powder will cling to it. Now, this is the point I got to where I realized I hadn't prepped my paper with a powder tool, so I was regretting that at that point, but thankfully most of the images turned out okay. I did have a little bit of an issue with a few spots on the bear, but I did end up recoloring him anyway because I wasn't particularly happy with my first lot of coloring. So I'm just using my heat tool to heat up those images. And I should say that this is Strathmore Bristol Smooth cardstock that I'm using, which works really, really well with the zigs. So for my bear, I went in with 062 dark brown and 064 oatmeal for his tummy and his nose. As I said, I recolored this bear in the end, which I did off camera. I just wasn't very happy with the way this turned out. I always struggle a little bit with my zigs. I would really like to get better at using them, so I need to use them more often. But I like the look that they give, but I just need to practice a little bit more. So I'm just going in with the blender brush and blending it out. But I ended up making this guy a little bit too dark. So I went back in and recolored him, and I did it a little bit lighter. So as I said before, I went in with the 064 oatmeal colour to do his little tummy and his nose. And then I went in with the light pink 026 for his nose, his ears, and I added some little cheeks with that marker too. And I used this colour on all of the images to do their little cheeks and their ears and noses where it needed it. So once I'd done my bear, I went on to the little cat, and for the cat I used 060 brown and 061 light brown. So I used the light brown for the most part of him. It's kind of like quite an orangey brown colour, so it's quite a nice colour for a little cat. And then I just used the brown for the little stripes, his little tiger stripes. So I was much happier with how the little cat turned out. I was quite happy with his shading. I really do need to practice with these zigs. I really love the effect that they give. I think it's really soft and kind of fairy tale-like looking. I don't know if that makes sense, but I really like the way that they look. The really important thing with using zigs is to use Bristol Smooth cardstock. Otherwise, I really, really struggle with them. I've tried them on watercolor and using a watercolor brush to blend them out, but I really struggled with that. So I really like using the blender brush and using Bristol Smooth cardstock. So for my little rabbit, I went in with 071 Natural Beige, which is a really light, pale, creamy color. And then just the little bits of pink for his ears and his nose and his cheeks. So on to my little penguin, and I used 090 grey for the darkest parts of him, and then I just used 091 light grey for his tummy. And again, I was quite happy with how these last three little critters turned out. It was just that bear that I wasn't particularly happy with, so I did redo him. And you will see that even though I used that embossing pad, I still managed to go outside the lines. So I just used my blender brush to try and smooth those parts out and make them less obvious. And obviously when you die cut these, you won't notice it as much anyway. So that's just what I do, just use the blender brush to blend it out. For his little beak, I used 052 bright yellow. And then it was onto the balloons, and I wanted to make these nice and bright, so I used 042 turquoise green and 027, which is dark pink. So once I was happy with the colouring, I did use the coordinating dies to go ahead and die cut these off camera. And as I say, I redid my bear because I felt he was just a little bit dark and I wasn't particularly happy with them. So you can see the difference here. Here's my first attempt and my second attempt. Unfortunately, my second attempt didn't die cut particularly well, but it's okay. I don't think you'll notice too much. So I'm going to take this Carpool Dienamics die from MFT and this MFT Road Trippin 6x6 paper pack, and I'm going to use that kind of teal spot to cut out the little car. Now I don't know if you can see there, but it does emboss some lines on the car so that it's really easy to see where to add all the little elements to it. So what I did was I used some kind of light blue cardstock and some bright pink cardstock, because I kind of wanted it to match the balloon colours that I'd used. And I just assembled my little car, and it's so cute. I really love this die. I don't know why I haven't used this more often. I'm so glad I pulled it out. As I say, today I didn't really have a plan. I just knew that I wanted to use my zigs, and I just went through my stamp set to try and find a stamp set that I thought would work, and this one popped out. And then I thought, well, why not make them sit in a little car? So that's what I'm doing here. And it's lots of fun to make. So in the stamp set that I used, the Better Together stamp set, there are actually some little stamps that can be used to stamp inside the license or registration plate or this little bonnet. One says happy and one says friends. I decided not to use them today, but they are a really cute little addition if you wanted to add them on. So just putting the finishing touches on now. I've got these little tyres. I did struggle to get these centered exactly where I wanted them to, so I did fiddle around with them for a little while. And the same with the little wing mirrors. I kind of took a little while to kind of get them exactly where I wanted. I'm not 100% sure that they're perfectly straight and even, but you know what, it's okay. So it was lots of fun to make, as I say. So all that's left is the little steering wheel. I'm going to add one of those bright pink cardstock dots to the center of it. It's part of the die, it cuts it out. And then I'm just going to line it up with the underneath of the car so I can line it up and put it exactly where I want it, so that my little driver has a steering wheel. So I'm just pulling out my images now, and I'm going to figure out where they're all going to go. So I started off with the little cat because I decided he was going to be the driver, and I was going to pop him in there behind the steering wheel. So just figuring out where he's going to go, and then I'm going to use my liquid glue to attach him underneath there. So once I had my little cat stuck where I wanted him, I put my bunny rabbit in the middle, and I was going to have my bear on the edge. What I wanted to do was just make sure that you could see their little faces. I didn't want the faces kind of covered up by the car. So I was just trying to figure out where to put them. And once I was kind of happy with where they were going to go, I added some liquid glue and just stuck them all in. And I did wiggle around with them for a bit to make sure I got them all in the right place. I realized after a bit that I had stuck my bunny rabbit down a little bit too low, because I want my little penguin to be kind of sat at the back behind him. And I needed him to be, because I wanted to see his face over the kind of edge of the car, I wanted him to kind of be stuck behind the rabbit, but he needs to be up high because he's only quite small. So I ended up having to fiddle around with that a little bit. But in the end, I got it exactly where I needed it to be. So you'll see here that I'm just going to pull my bunny rabbit off and kind of pull him up a little bit higher so that he can hide the legs, I guess, of my penguin. And then I'm just going to go and stick the balloons, one bunch on either side of my little penguin. So now that's all complete. I've got my little car done. I'm just going to go in with my Sakura white jelly roll pen and add some little highlights to the car and also to the balloons. I'm not sure that it shows up particularly well on the balloons, but I just like to add it anyway. I was thinking about putting some glossy accents on these, but because it's watercolor, I was a bit nervous about doing that, so I just left them as they were. After that, I took my MFT inside out stitched circles and my A2 stitched rectangle Stax set 1, and I used some of the paper from the Road Trippin paper pack to cut those out. And here you can see, sorry for the massive close-up, I was standing up at this point, which I don't normally do when I'm crafting, but at the moment it's easier sometimes to stand up and stretch my leg out a little bit. So I'm just adding some liquid glue, and I'm going to pop my car on that circle that I cut from the kind of pavement paper, and I'm going to try and center that up as best I can, and I'm just going to glue it all down. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to take that stitched rectangle that I cut from the kind of turquoise swirly paper, and I'm going to line everything up and then figure out where I'm going to stamp my sentiment. So my sentiment comes from the Up in the Air MFT stamp set, which just says Happy Birthday. So it's very simple, but I wanted it to be centered in between the balloons. So I hadn't adhered anything down yet. I just wanted to figure out where to put it. And I did some partial stamping. So I started out with the birthday part. And you can see I'm just going to wipe off where I've got it onto the happy part. And I'm going to stamp that down. And then up above it, I'm going to stamp down the happy part. So my sentiment will just read Happy Birthday. So once I was happy with my sentiment, I went ahead and took some foam tape and just placed it all over the back of my circle panel and on the back of the balloons to prop it up a little bit and give it a little bit of dimension. And then I just adhered that down onto my stitched rectangle. I placed it down the bottom, as you already saw me lining up when I did the stamping, just so that I could fit my sentiment in up the top in between those balloons. So once I'm happy with the placement, I press it all down, and then I used a standard sized card base, 5.5 by 4.25 inches, which I cut from that same bright pink cardstock that I'd used for the trim of the car. And I just adhered my panel down onto that so that there's a tiny little kind of 1/8 inch border all the way around in that bright pink, and I just think it helps make it pop. And that's it, card done. Let me know what you thought of this one. It was a little bit different for me. I was definitely winging it today, but I really enjoyed using my zigs. I do have to pull them out more often. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel. I'd love to see you come back again. And thank you so much for joining me.